evening, everyone. Welcome to Reading, Writing, and Ralph. Happy Tuesday. We are almost to the first day of fall. Super exciting. I know I have felt those first few inklings of the crisp weather, and it makes me super happy. So I am also happy to be here on the show. I would like to kick things off by thanking our sponsor, the Kathleen and Eddie Arthur Hearts of Love Fund. So they have just got their website up. They have started a couple of new projects, one involving playgrounds, one involving homes, sheltering some people who need a little bit of help with their housing. So it is a community assistance fund, and it's a nonprofit. So you guys can go donate now at their new website, arthurheartsoflove.org. Really great cause and founded by a really great person for a really good reason. So I would also like to promote an upcoming event related to Reading, Writing, and Ralph. To do that, I'm going to bring Ralph on and we're going to talk about it a little bit before we introduce tonight's author. All right. Hello, Ralph. How are you?
Great, Grace. How are you doing? I can't believe the summer's gone tomorrow already.
I know. So I think you know which event I'm talking about that's coming up on October 15th. It is the Mystery in the Museum at Gadsby's Tavern. So let's talk about this for a little bit. Tell us what the evening is going to look like.
Well, I'm so excited to do this. I mean, we are bringing Reading, Writing, and Ralph live to Gadsby's Tavern and Museum, October 15th, for a show that will be 7:30 to approximately 9:30 p.m. And we've got some tremendous local talent, both acting in and working on the script for this. And I'm very blessed to be working with such people in this. And the premise is that Reading, Writing, and Ralph, we are going there to Gadsby's to interview a high-profile author, and when I get there, the mystery unfolds. And for 2 hours, we'll be interactive with the audience, and they will try to solve the mystery. The tickets are $100 a person. It's a fundraiser, so they're tax deductible. John Wazowitz's book, and then there'll be some raffles for some prizes. But it's a fabulous event. It's for a great cause. We're trying to raise money for museum, and it's going to be a fun night. It's going to be a fun night, and nothing like this we've done with Reading, Writing, and Ralph before. So it'll be.
I know it's gonna be great. So like you said, the premise is based on John's book. The I believe fourth or fifth of many that it's his fourth book. So you guys are probably familiar with him and his works. He's awesome. Tickets are $100, but you get desserts and bubbly and coffee and entertainment and a raffle, and everyone goes home with a book. And it's also the proceeds go to Gadsby's Tavern. So really, like, you get your bang for your buck. It's going to be a really great night. I will put the link up right here. That's the link to go register. There will also be a story in Zebra's October issue, which comes out in approximately 2 weeks. So you can get a little more detail on that. All right. So now that we have that introduced, let's talk about tonight's author. Some of you might remember him. We are talking about his second book today. We are introducing Kevin Keating. He's coming back on to talk about his book, Waiting for a Sign, Volume 2. We're talking baseball today. Ralph, there's no other literary reviewer to talk about baseball better than yourself. So give us a little bit of a preview on Kevin for those who do not know.
Yeah, the premise of Kevin's first book, and it was a beautiful premise. And, whether you're a boy or a girl, everybody at some point looks to an athletic idol or a rock star idol and, seeks to get their autograph. Well, Kevin, when he was a young boy, through a fascinating turn of events, cut school, got caught, and got the autograph that he was after, and he fell in love with that, and he's made a life journey out of waiting for the sign, waiting for someone to sign, and the way he goes about it, and the folks he's met from Hall of Famers to second-rate players, fascinating stuff, and he's made a bevy of lifetime friends with these professional baseball players while he was waiting for the sign. So he was an early on guest when we first started ZTV, and we rolled out Reading, Writing, and Ralph. So I'm happy to have him back. He's a wonderful person, and I'm looking forward to hearing the stories about the second group that he is put into this volume 2.
Absolutely. I just want to remind everyone there is trivia tonight. So be the first to answer in the comments correctly. You'll get a free signed copy of Kevin's volume 2. So with that, I will let you guys take it away.
Kevin, welcome back.
Hey, Ralph. Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad you finally got this one done. I remember when you were first on and we were talking about that one. And I really enjoyed the crisp storytelling in this one, and it's very much touching as the first one was when you go through those heartfelt stories. But so thanks for coming on. So, but what I always like to do is, we've got viewers, and it's been a couple of years. So why don't you give our viewers your background and how you got into this, and tell them that captivating story of when you cut school.
Well, how much time do we have? So yeah, I mean, I really getting autographs is just an adjunct to my love for baseball. I fell in love with baseball when I was 10, which was back in 1969, and we lived outside of Chicago, and that was the magical year the Cubs were going to win the pennant. And I kind of had a front seat to that, living in Evanston, Illinois, and the Cubs jumped out. I think they were 11-1. And they were well on their way to fulfilling the prophecy that the 69 Cubs were going to win the pennant that year. That was the year the Cubs were going to break the losing streak, after the 1908 last World Championship that they had. So anyway, the Mets kind of ruined that plan. And I didn't realize, as I was falling in love with baseball and, emotionally attached to the Cubs, and kind of went up and then came, crashing down at the end of the season when the Cubs faded, that I was really watching kind of an epic season. I mean, that season is still widely discussed and talked about, and people that lived through it on either side, either the Mets or the Cubs, still talk about the 69 season, the Miracle Mets and the 69 Cubs. But anyway, I collected baseball cards because that was what I knew how I could collect relative to baseball. I didn't know how to get autographs yet, but then I discovered how to get autographs. My dad worked across the street from the hotel that all the teams stayed at, where we'd have a team in town virtually every day of the summer, either playing the Cubs or the White Sox. And all these teams stayed at this hotel across the street from where my dad worked, East Wacker Drive, I think is the address, 75 East or West Wacker. I get that confused. But in any event, it was called the Executive House Hotel. And my dad kind of stumbled into it one day. He saw some people getting an autograph. He asked, what are you doing? Oh, we're getting autographs of the San Francisco Giants. So he ran and he got a baseball at a local store, went back just in time to get Willie Mays and a few others on the ball. He brought that home to me, and I was like, wow, an autograph. Like Willie Mays touched this baseball. Maybe I can meet him. So I started going down to the hotel with my father, because I was 10, 11, 12. And, I would go down under his supervision, and he would stand there as I would get autographs, and he would assist me at times. And I got to be, first of all, by the time I got out of high school, I had over 10,000 baseball autographs that I got either in person at the hotel or at Wrigley Field. We didn't go to White Sox Park much because it was much farther out of town. All the games were night games, and it was, wasn't in a safe part of town. So my place was Wrigley Field, the hotel. And I also discovered, because someone had informed me, a dealer named Pat Quinn, who's still alive and still dealing autographs. He's well before his time when it comes to that, to being on the financial part of the business, let's say. But Pat had informed me when I was like 11, look, if you write to the Baseball Hall of Fame, write any player you want, carry the Baseball Hall of Fame, put a self-addressed stamped envelope in there and maybe 5 things, baseball cards, index cards, whatever you can muster, and put a self-addressed stamped envelope and write a nice letter, and they'll sign them and send them back to you. You know, try that out. It works. And that's what I did. And I started writing to Baseball Hall of Famers, non-Hall of Famers, all, you know, in care of the Baseball Hall of Fame, Cooperstown, New York, 13326 was the address, still is, I'm sure. Anyway, between writing to players, going to Wrigley, standing in front of the hotel for hours on end, that's how I amassed my collection. So by the time I got out of high school, went in the Army, went to West Point, I had a massive collection of autographs and memories. And so getting back to the famous day or infamous day that I was caught cutting class. So my parents would allow me one day off a month during the baseball season to go to the hotel and get autographs at the team that I wanted if I maintained my grades at a B or better. So that was my motivation. So this particular day, I was playing hooky with my parents' permission, and I was standing in front of the hotel getting New York Mets autographs. It was, I think, May 18th, 1973. So I would have been 14 years old. And I was in 8th grade. 8th grade was wrapping up, getting ready to graduate 8th grade, move on to high school. And the writer, one of the Sun-Times writers who had a column in the paper and was kind of at the infancy of his career, he became very famous. His name is Bob Grain. And Bob Grain had his own column, and he kept looking out his office window across the street. Actually, it was across the river, but looking across the river on the street at the front of the hotel. Here's this kid standing in the same place every time he looked out for several hours. And finally, his curiosity got the best of him, and he came down and walked over to me, introduced himself, and basically started interviewing me. He's like, hey, kid, you know, I've been watching you from my office window over there. Like, would you mind telling me what you're doing? Don't you have school today? Yeah, I've got school. Well, what are you doing here? I haven't seen you move the last 3 hours. And I told him what I was doing. And he said, do your parents know that, you know, that you're here doing this? And I said, yeah. In fact, they wrote a letter saying I was homesick. You know, and so, you know, yeah, totally with their permission. And as soon as I said they'd written a letter explaining that I was homesick, that's when he pulled out his pen and paper and he goes, you mind if I do my column on you in tomorrow's paper? And I'm like, sure, you know. So I don't know. For 20 or 30 minutes, he stood there, interviewed me, watched me get a few autographs, and then he ran off. He said, okay, I got what I need, kid. You know, have a good rest of the day. I'm going to send a photographer over. So about a half an hour later, this big guy with one of these big cameras, right? Like back then they were like suitcase cameras, and it had a big silver pan, you know, with the light.
Yeah.
So he walks up and he's like, hey, you the kid getting autographs? I'm like, yeah. He goes, can you grab a baseball player? You know, I need a picture of you with the baseball player. And I'm like, that's not how it works. I mean, I can't grab a baseball player, you know, but the doorman who I got to know really well, named Paul Sheehan, he said, I can go grab somebody. So he went in and he got Jim Fregosi. And Fregosi came out, took some pictures. And I get home that night and I tell my parents what's going on, and they freak out because they know what's happening the next day, right? I don't really understand all this yet. So the next day, on the way to school, you know, my mom drives me to school. We stop off at the White End Pantry. I buy some copies of the paper because there it is, page 14. And, you know, the whole page, a whole newspaper page. It's like, you know, waiting for a sign. Kevin Keating from Algonquin Middle School, blah, 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 blah. And there's the big picture of me and Jim Fregosi. So my mom goes, leave the papers in the car. Don't tell anybody about this. But I get into school, and we used to go to homeroom, take attendance, they make announcements, then you move on to another class where you started your day. And everything happened like it was supposed to. But then at the end, Mr. Zangi, the vice principal in charge of student discipline, his voice comes bellowing across the loudspeakers, and he says, Kevin Keating, report to Mr. Zangi's office immediately. And all the kids looked at me like, man, what did you do? Kill somebody? Because Zangi never got on the loudspeaker, you know, demanding somebody go to him in that circumstance. So I went in there and sheepishly was walking past all the secretaries, and they were waving me on. You know, they were looking at me like, man, you're about ready to get massacred. And I got to the door, and I could see Zangi because the door was half open, and he's sitting there like this, and he's got the paper spread out here and he's looking at it. He's got my mom's note over here. And I go to knock on the door and he goes, "Come in, Kevin." He never looks at me. He's just sitting back and he goes, "Tell me where you were yesterday." And I said, "I'm looking at the paper. I'm thinking, man, I'm not going to fib." I said, "I was in Chicago. What were you doing?" I was getting autographs. And then he started screaming at me. He goes, "I know that. Do you know that your mom wrote me this letter? Do you know I just got off the phone with the superintendent of the school district? And he told me I should suspend you. But I'm not going to do that as long as you promise me, as long as you're at this middle school, you will never do this again." I'm thinking, man, I got 2 weeks left here. I wasn't going to go back anyway. So I'm making the promise. I get out of there as soon as I can. He dismisses me. I'm on my way out the door. And then I hear a different voice come at me and he says, "Kevin." And I stopped and I turned around, not knowing what was coming next. And he goes, "By the way, did you get Yogi Berra's autograph?" Because Berra was managing the Mets at the time. And I said, "Yes, sir. I got him 3 times." And he goes, "Yogi was my favorite player when he caught on the Yankees, and now get the hell out of here." And he whisked me on. And I knew that was his way of telling me, "Look, kid, I had to discipline you because you broke a rule and your mom lied about it." And he really made a big deal about my mom lying about it. That really seemed to be the most troublesome thing to him. He goes, "But he was letting me know that, I understand what you did though." And by the way, book 1 came, I never saw Zangy again, ever. That was in 8th grade. I'm in my early 60s now. And so when book 1 came out in 2018, I went on Facebook and started asking people, that my high school friends that are still in the area, is Mr. Zangy still alive? Does anybody know of him? And long story short, I got a book to Mr. Zangy, who's in his upper 80s now. And we've since become friends. He's read the book. He loved the book. I wrote to him a letter with the book and I said, "Dear Mr. Zangy, you won't remember me, but I'll never forget you." And he wrote me back right away and he said, "You know what?" He said, "You're right. I don't remember you, but what you wrote in the book, I'm sure happened exactly the way you said it. But I only remember the kids that came back over and over and over again into my office." But turns out he is indeed a lifetime baseball fan. So that Ralph, you asked me about that story, and I'm sorry for taking up so much time telling it, but in a really interesting way, that incident, I credit that incident and Bob Green for basically setting me off on a path of pursuing autographs for the rest of my life. Because honestly, at that point in time, no one was doing it. No one was doing it. And I was like the only one I knew who was doing it. And I would get players' autographs and I'd hand them a stack of 15 baseball cards and they'd sign the stuff and they'd say, "What the hell do you do with this stuff, kid?" No one made sense of it because it wasn't an in vogue thing. There was no money in it. And I honestly don't know if I'd have continued doing it because some of my friends, people around me in school, and let's face it, when you're in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, you really do pay a lot of attention to peer pressure. And a lot of people thought I was weird. But as soon as Green made a story out of it, and I went in the paper like that, I mean, kids were bringing copies to me to autograph. I was literally autographing copies of the newspaper. I became like a mini celebrity, and it kind of sanctified what I was doing, and it made me feel okay about it. And from that point on, I mean, I really pursued it with vigor.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I love the way you tell it. It seems to get a little bit more enhanced and a little more detail, and but it's a fun memory. And Mr. Zangy, wherever he is, I'm sure he's going to think about that and recollect what took place because it's right there in front of him. I'm gonna give the first trivia question to the audience so we can get them started. So, first question is, whose baseball autograph is usually rated the most valuable? It's a pretty easy question, I think. So, when you look back then, you were looked at as weird. The dynamics have all changed. Now it's all about the money. You closed the second book with an epilogue about Aaron Judge. And the bottom line is you had to pay for the baseballs, right?
Yep.
So someone like you who's been a lifelong collector of autographs and from some renowned people, how do you feel about the shift where it's now all about the money? Here's a guy that's making $20 million a year and he can care less about a $150 ball. I mean, what's your thoughts?
It's a complicated issue. It really is because, people place, monetary value. I mean, I place tremendous value on the autographs that I got. I still do. But, now there's a monetary value associated with it. So because of that, I mean, when you think about it, every time a player does this, money's coming out of their hands, literally, right? Especially someone like Tom Brady. Tom Brady can sign footballs all day long. $1,500, $1,500, $1,500. It's crazy. But that also puts the players in a tough spot, right? Because with that, puts a lot more demand on their time because wherever they go, there are people chasing them. And with social media, and that's the thing, with these things, you can immediately, you can snap photos. I get Aaron Judge signing a baseball. I take a picture of it and immediately I put it on eBay and now it's being sold. And so the players don't know who's getting the autograph because they want to capitalize on that interaction and who's getting it because like young Kevin Keating, they love getting the autograph and the interaction. And so they can't make a distinction between one or the other. Now, you could say, well, if a little kid goes up to the player, but a lot of dealers and people we call chasers who get autographs and that's how they make their living. And I'm not in any way suggesting that they're not good people either. It's just that they're businessmen, right? They're business people. They're trying to make money, right, through the autographs. And so they'll pay kids to actually be the ones chasing the autographs because players are more likely to sign for free for a young child going up to them. So again, the players don't know if that's happening. So it's, I think in the epilogue, it's kind of a beautiful story to end both volumes. If you've read both books and you get to the epilogue, it really helped me tie up everything by saying, if you've been on the journey with me from volume 1 through volume 2, and you're here at the epilogue of volume 2, then you know what it was like for me then, 50 years ago when I started and all these intervening years. And now here's the epilogue, and here's what it's like today. Today, it's very difficult and it's very complicated, and the players need to be protected in some ways because if there isn't some insulation around the players, then they've got no privacy at all. And that's kind of where the yin and the yang is, that's where the friction is.
Yeah. And you're right. They don't know where it's going. They don't know who's capitalizing off that. It's a huge business, as you very well know. And it makes it harder for the average person that's not a kid to really to get an autograph. It makes it much more difficult for them. We have a winner on the first question. Grace?
Yes. So the answer was, of course, Babe Ruth. So John Gorski, regular. Thanks for tuning in, John. Got that answer correct.
Great. Welcome, John. The I've read most of both books, and so there's a couple of characters I wanted to talk about tonight because I think their stories are entertaining. And I'm going to veer a little bit from the order that I had it. The first one I want to talk about is Clemente, right? Because it's been Roberto Clemente week, and we all know, well, maybe most don't know the tragic story of Clemente. He died on a mission to Nicaragua to help with the relief program, and he had just that season ended with his 3,000th hit. A fabulous player, huge humanitarian. Now, did you have the chance to meet him and interact with him?
I met him twice. As I mentioned, my father would take me to the hotel, in the early years. So as it turned out, the second time I ever went to the hotel was in September of 1970, and it was to see the Pirates. And up until then, I was kind of like looking for a favorite player, like all the Chicago, kids that, that I hung out with, they all like Randy Hundley or Ernie Banks or whatever. And I didn't really have a guy that, that I wanted to be that guy. And Clemente came out of the hotel with Manny Sanguin. I'm 11 years old. And I'll never forget, he was wearing all white and he had this beautiful skin. I mean, he was a beautiful man, on a baseball field. And you probably saw him play too, Ralph, right? You saw him on TV. I mean,
yes, well, I actually saw him at Shea Stadium when he came in to play the Mets.
Yeah, I mean, the guy and everything he did was so graceful. And I don't know that I've ever seen anybody since then that's impacted me watching them play the way that Clemente did, because he was just beautiful at everything he did. He comes out of the hotel and I was just in awe. I mean, there were a few other people there that day, and usually I'd be the only person, or maybe there'd be one or two, but there were like 6 or 7 people. And everybody was there to meet Clemente. And Clemente comes out, and if I'd had 20 things that day, he would have signed them all. I just stood there and signed everything people put in front of him, and was so kind. And by the time he left, I shook his hand both times. I met him again 2 years later, but both times I met him, he shook my hand. And the first time he patted me on the head, as he went off to get in the cab, and I called him Bob because my '69 baseball card, I think, said Bob Clemente. Like, Bob, but I decided from that point on he'd be my favorite player. And then watching him in the '71 World Series, oh my gosh, it was just unbelievable what he did in the World Series on that stage against the Orioles. That I think the Orioles were probably a much better team overall, but Clemente just beat them, and they won. The Pirates won the World Series that year. And then in '72, I went back, and by now I'd traded for every Clemente card I could get, and I had about 15 of them. And he came. I'm there with a friend, and we're there to get Clemente. I mean, that's our goal. And he came out of the hotel and shot to the right, and he was walking faster than any human being could possibly walk in my mind. And it took me like a half a city block running to catch up to him. And he wasn't running, but he was walking obviously as fast as he could. He was in a hurry. And by the time I got to him, I was kind of out of breath, and I knew he was not going to stand and sign 15 cards. I thought, I'll be lucky if he even takes the stack. He took the stack, and I thought he's going to scribble. I'd been through this before with other people that were in a rush, and I thought he's going to scribble off the first one and hand it back to me. So I said, Mr. Clemente, would you please sign the top 2? And he did. He signed the top 2. I'm sure he wouldn't have signed all of them. So I would have. I think I doubled my take that day. And I thought, you know what? I'll come back next year and I'll get him on the rest of these cards. Yeah. And so, it never happened. He was gone by then.
In your meeting him and your evaluation, his character, as he was portrayed, was equal to when you met him. Now, is there anybody that you met where that didn't occur, either to the bad or the good side? Either you expected somebody a little bit more callous, or you expected somebody a little bit more, mellow and jovial?
Well, I always go into autograph. I always went into autographs trying to not have expectations, just to have goals, because they're human beings. You don't know if you're going to see them. If you see them, you don't know what the circumstances are going to be. I mean, you may be at the hotel and you realize, well, okay, I have hotel circumstances, but what if they come out, and they've got their wife and kids with them, which, that would happen sometimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just don't know. What if they come out? What if they come out when the 15 other guys come out at the same time to get on the bus, and you miss him because you're getting one guy while he makes his way onto the bus? I mean, I just always try to temper my expectations and realize that, these guys are human. But to get to your point, I think the one guy that I met where I had him like in a bad way the first time, and then the second time it couldn't have been better, was Rod Carew. And I wrote about Carew, his chapters in volume 1. But, again, just to synopsize the story, the first time I meet him, I'm 11 years old. It's 1970. And he comes out with Tony Oliva and Herman Hill. And, I get Tony, I get Herman. And by the time I make my way to Carew, I got my baseball. Mr. Carew, would you please sign my baseball? And he says, son, why don't you take a long walk off a short pier? And I didn't even know what that meant. And the real irony to that is that Herman Hill was there, and Herman Hill actually did drown. His friend Herman Hill drowned less than like 3 months later playing winter ball down in Venezuela. That's a whole nother story. But I kept following Carew because I didn't know what he meant by that. He never said another word. I must have followed him 50 feet till he got to the cab. I opened the door. He got in, wished him good luck, said goodbye. My dad was there. He didn't quite hear what Carew said, but he said to me when I walked back, he said, it looked like Carew said something to you, but he didn't sign, right? I said, no, he didn't sign. He goes, well, what did he say? So I told my dad. My dad got livid, and he wrote a letter to the Minnesota Twins complaining that Carew had mistreated his son, blah, blah, blah. But really his motivation was he was hoping the Twins would say, well, please take this autograph photo that we're sending you from Rod, as our way of making up for it. But we got a letter back from the Twins, and I met Carew like 4 years later in the middle of the season. He was hitting like 400 at the time, and it was one of his best seasons. And he stood there for half an hour. He gave me baseball lessons on how to bunt. He signed everything I had. He offered, like I got him 18 times, I think it was. He offered me tickets to the game. And my point is that Rod was one of those guys. I met him on a bad day, and I met him on a good day. And people are people. And when you're meeting a player for just a moment in time, you've got to remember, they may mistreat you in your mind. And I'm not suggesting Rod Carew should have said what he did to me the first time, but I forgive him. He's a person. I hit him on a bad day. Man, he more than made up for it the next time I met him. And I met him many times since then. He's a wonderful human being. So I just try to remind people that, just because you have an impression of somebody from an instantaneous meeting, you're just another person interfering with their day is what it really boils down to. Because you're a stranger to them. You're asking them to do a favor for you. And you know what? The timing might not be good for them.
Yeah, you're right. They are human. They are humans, and they're going to have human emotions and human approaches to things. I'm going to ask the second trivia question. This one's a little bit trickier than the first. What do the following celebrities have in common? So again, what do the following celebrities have in common? Cameron Diaz, Russell Crowe, Will Ferrell, and Tobey Maguire. So again, what do the following celebrities have in common? Cameron Diaz, Russell Crowe, Will Ferrell, and Tobey Maguire. I like the stories in the book, and there's a couple others that jumped out at me, and Elmer Fleck was one of them. So talk about Elmer Fleck, because he's an interesting character. A lot of people might not know who he is because he's an early 19th century guy. So why don't you talk about him?
Right. So he came up in the 1890s, and his final season, I believe, was 1910. And so when I started writing to players, at the Hall of Fame, and I was having great success because basically everybody answered their mail back then, I thought, well, I better get to the oldest guy first, right? I better get to that guy because I had very limited resources. I mean, postage adds up. I got like a quarter a week for my allowance, and my parents would give me a little more money to write away. But, I had to decide who I was going to write to based on my resources. So I wrote to Elmer Fleck almost like right away. And by the time I wrote him a letter, he was already basically dying and he was unable to answer his mail. But about his background, I think it was 1907. Like Ty Cobb came up in 1905. But in 1907, the Cleveland Indians, the Detroit Tigers tried to trade Ty Cobb straight up for Elmer Fleck. And the Cleveland Indians, who owned Elmer Fleck, refused to do it. That's how much they valued Elmer Fleck at the time. Yeah. They turned down Ty Cobb for Elmer Fleck in 1907. So think about that. But to me, the fascination was, if I write to Elmer Fleck and I get his autograph, I'm getting a guy who played with Ed Delahanty and Mike King Kelly and all these guys from the 19th century who've been dead for decades, and just all these guys are stories in books to me, because that's how you learned about baseball. You read books. But here's a living connection to that. And that's what fascinated me. But, I wasn't able to get him, but it did start a very small exchange between me and Elmer Fleck's daughter, which was my first interaction with a Hall of Famer's family.
Right. Right. Yeah. Elmer Fleck is in the Hall of Fame, but yeah, you've had some great interactions. Talk about interactions with Casey.
Oh, Casey was a riot. I mean, a real hoot. Like, I write the Casey Stengel chapter because it took me a while to figure out what was going on. But, I would always write the Casey Stengel. Well, let me start this way. I knew Warren Spahn very well. Warren was like a second father to me. And Warren came up in 42 pitching for the Boston Braves before he went off to World War II. Pitched in 5 games for the Braves without any decision before he went into the war. Then he came back and, put together 363 wins. And in 1965, when Spahn ended his career, he went to the Mets and then finished later in 65 at the end of the season with the San Francisco Giants. But Stengel managed him at Boston in 42. And Stengel managed him in 65, with the Mets. And in Warren Spahn's Hall of Fame induction speech in 1973, his speech was only like 1 page long, but he started off saying this because Stengel was sitting right there. And he looked at Casey and he said, I had the distinction of playing for the great Casey Stengel before and after he was famous. And the illusion is that, what he was alluding to was the fact that Stengel had awful records with all the teams he ever managed, except for the Yankees. From 49 to 60, the guy was a genius, he won 8 pennants and 6 or 7 world titles during that run, and that's what got him in the Hall of Fame. So when I would write to him, I'd say, dear Mr. Stengel, congratulations on your great years with the Yankees, and I'd always be writing about the Yankees. And in case he'd always write back and he'd sign everything. Usually he'd sign stuff 2 or 3 times on the same item. And he'd always write, become a big leaguer, root for the New York Mets. It was always about the Mets. Like the photos he'd send back were with the Mets. He wanted nothing to do with the Yankees. And I finally figured out the reason for that was because in 1960, the Yankees played the Pirates in the World Series. Clemente had a great World Series then. Got a hit in all 7 games. Yeah. And the Yankees outscored the Pirates like 40-something to 12 or whatever it was. It wasn't quite that lopsided, but it was very lopsided. And even though they outscored them by a bunch, they lost the World Series 4 games to 3. And then at the end of the season, the Yankees came up with a rule, and they said anybody 70 years or older in the organization will be automatically terminated. And Stengel was the only one in the organization who was 70. So that was their way of getting rid of him, and he never forgave them.
Yeah, it sure was. That was a devastating World Series for Yankee fans because the Yankees beat the crap out of the Pirates most of the time and lost.
Yeah.
And there's
then Ralph Terry gave up a home run to Mazeroski in the 9th inning, and that was it.
Yeah, and if Berra had a take on that. And he was playing left field. Howard was catching, and Jim Coates came in to pitch. And there was I think it was the bases loaded or runners on second and third. And Berra's trying to call timeout because he wanted to make Coates aware. Coates was notoriously kind of not with it sometimes, and he wanted Howard to make Coates aware of the situation and what to do with the ball if it was hit back to the box. Well, Coates pitches. Next ball is dribbled back to the pitcher's mound, and Coates throws to the wrong bag. So, and that gave them a chance to tie the game, score runs in the 8th inning, and then win the game in the 9th, as you know. So, a lot of intrigue in that game, in that series. Yeah. We have a winner. Let's see who the winner is this time.
Yes. So the verbatim answer was that these celebrities do not sign autographs. Jeffrey Levin came in with the answer. They are the rudest celebrities to get autographs from. So them not signing autographs might be why they're so rude to get autographs from. I think that is a good answer, and we're going to give Jeffrey Levine the win.
Jeffrey,
congratulations, Jeffrey.
He's a big fan of the show as well, and a big baseball fan. and he's a Yankee fan as well. So he's a good guy all around.
Great.
But we got a couple of more. One of my favorite characters growing up, in addition to Dave DeBusschere, who played baseball and basketball, was Chuck Connors, who was an actor and played baseball. Tell us about him and what he was like in getting his autograph.
How much time do we have? How much time do we have left? I can, I was so close with Chuck for a couple of years, the back end of his life. And, I still can't believe that he and I became so close. And I love Chuck. He was just a wonderful human being. And, I met him. The way I met him was I was at a hotel having lunch. And the hotel was near where there was a show going on. That's why I was up there, and it was up in Long Island. And I knew that Chuck was at the show. I knew what the show lineup was. So I'm having lunch with my friend, and I hear Chuck Connors' voice walk behind me, and I froze. The rifleman. And I said to my friend, I said, didn't Chuck Connors just walk behind me? And he said, he looked up and he goes, oh yeah, he just sat in a booth over there. And I looked, and there he was, the silver haired, sitting with his back to me. He had a black shirt on just like this. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to go get his autograph. So I ran out to the car, waited. I got my wits about me. It took me a few minutes, to kind of get my composure because I was so excited. And I ran out to the car. I had some baseballs there, and I go grab these baseballs. I grabbed a couple of them, and I had people in mind for him to sign the balls to. And I'm thinking about, I was trying to think of something to talk to him about, try to engage him. And I came up with the perfect question. And it was that when I was at West Point, because I'm a graduate of West Point, I had watched this show. It was, the show had been filmed in the 50s. It was a TV show called The West Point Story. And Gene Roddenberry, who later became famous for Star Trek, he was a producer of the show, and it ran a couple seasons, maybe 40 episodes. And they had videos of this on, VHS tapes, and I'd put them in at the library and watch them every now and then. And Chuck had been in two of them that I had seen. He played a tactical officer. This was before The Rifleman. So there were people in these shows like, Barbara Eden and Clint Eastwood and Leonard Nimoy. So it was really fun as a cadet to spend time watching these shows to see who I'd see playing a cadet or a cadet's girlfriend or whatever, on site at West Point being filmed for the show that ran on TV in the 50s. Anyway, I went up to Chuck, and by the time I got to him, they had delivered his food, and he literally had a fork in his hand with a piece of steak hanging out. And I said, Mr. Connors, would you mind signing these baseballs? And he looked at me and he glared at me. I mean, he gave me a look like, don't bother me, man. Like I'm busy. And I don't know what it was. And he just stared at me, and I said, would you mind signing these baseballs? They're not for me. They're for my mom and my girlfriend. And he looked at me, and I said, please. And he goes, put them down. And then I leaned over and I whispered in his ear, basically, and I said, do you remember doing a TV show called The West Point Story? And, he had a fork up again. He dropped the fork. It clanged. He looked at me and he goes, how the hell do you remember that? You weren't even alive when I was filming that show. I mean, like, think about it. In the 40 years or whatever it was, 30-something years since he had done that show, how many people had asked him that question? I was probably the only one. Right. And so, why would I ask? So I said, well, when I was at West Point, and he said, did you go to West Point? And I said, yeah. He said, did you graduate? I said, yeah. He said, what year? And so it started a whole conversation. And he said, do you know that I taught tank gunnery to Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis when I was stationed at West Point in World War II? And I said, I didn't know you were stationed at West Point. And it started this whole conversation. He goes, what's your name? I said, Kevin Keating. And he said, my name's Kevin Joseph Aloysius Connors. Chuck's just a nickname. So he ended up inviting me to sit down and have lunch with him. We became buddies. I ended up spending a lot of time with him at different shows and things for a couple of years. And I stayed with him at his ranch over Labor Day weekend in 1992, and I didn't know, and neither did he, that he was a couple of months away from passing. Because right after I left, he got really sick. He had a very aggressive lung cancer, and he passed away, I think it was November 10th. But yeah, I still, there's some really great stories in there about Chuck, which I haven't touched on here.
Yeah.
Especially when we were in the car that day, and we both nearly missed death when Chuck was driving. But Chuck was a wonderful human being. I never saw him turn an autograph away. I asked him one time, I said, Chuck, what's it like to be you? You know, everywhere we go, you're 6'6". Everybody recognizes you. No one ever leaves you alone. And he said to me, he goes, are you kidding me? He goes, every time someone wants to meet me, shake my hand, get a picture, get an autograph, he goes, that's unconditional love. He goes, that's unconditional love. He goes, who am I to turn that away? And that's how he lived his life. And I got to witness that firsthand. And it's true.
Yeah. That's a great story. I love that chapter of the book. Connors was, I always liked athletes that played and did more than one thing. And they got rarer and rarer, as you know. And but a great story. So what's next? Where do you go? Do we have a volume 3 coming up, or what do you do next?
I'd love to do a volume 3, but the way I'd like to do it is I'd like to take great autograph collecting stories that other people have and write about them. I've tried to pursue that. It's kind of difficult because most people, like everything in my book, I know is true. And I support everything that I write with pictures and things like that. Most people don't do that, right? So it's kind of tough. I mean, if I was going to do a volume 3 of Waiting for a Sign, I certainly have other people that I could write about, that I think would be interesting, like these stories have been, I think. But I'd really rather use other people's stories. And I do put a few in volume 2. I start off with some other people's stories about autograph collecting, but I am working on some other writing projects, including a baseball book that's more of a fictional book. But yeah, I continue to write.
Great. Well, when you get the next book done, let us know, and we'll get you back in queue again. But
thanks, Ralph. I appreciate being here. It's been a lot of fun. I love talking to you. You're a kindred spirit.
Yes, there's a lot of baseball fans out there, and and we have to enjoy the game for what it is right now. Not like the old days, but it's still a great game, and I hope they don't, regulate it to death. But
yeah, that's a good way to put it. My kids play baseball. I've been fortunate to be able to coach them the last few years, and it is a great game. It's a great game to teach your kids. It's a great game for kids to learn. And you learn a lot of life lessons playing baseball. And I've learned a lot of life lessons collecting autographs. I started writing these chapters back in 1988, believe it or not. And it was really at the behest of my father and my friends who would say, man, you gotta put these stories down so other people can enjoy them. And I would do that. And then as I got close to finishing volume 2, and I stood back and looked at the collection of stories that comprise volume 1 and 2, I realized in a lot of ways, these are each tributes and individual stories about players that impacted my life. But at the same time, as a collection, it's kind of a mosaic of my life. And I've been blessed to have had this journey through autograph collecting, to have my life shaped in a lot of ways. As you probably know, I'm the principal authenticator for, PSA. And that's what I do now is I authenticate autographs for a living. I mean, how great is that? My passion is my livelihood as well.
Yeah, you're living your passion. It's fabulous. It's unbelievable. Anyway,
yeah. So, by the way, Ralph, you can get the book, volume 2. It's not on Amazon. Only the Kindle version is. But volume 2 is available at waitingforasignbook.com because the publisher, only the publisher right now is selling the hard copies. So it's waitingforasignbook.com. Had to make a plug. Thank you.
Great book. I enjoyed reading it. Kevin, keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll have you back soon. And if you're not doing anything on October 15th, get over to Gadsby's Tavern and Museum.
I would love to, man. That sounds like a blast. Congratulations.
It's going to be a show.
Yeah, I'm really happy for you. Thank you, Ralph. I
See you,
salute
Kevin.
you.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Thank you.
All right, good show. I hope he comes to the October 15th show.
So.
It's going to be a good
Bring his
one.
wife. He'll be entertained. Anybody that comes that night will be. It's going to be an entertaining evening. A lot of very talented folks and a good cause, and looking forward to it. It's
Absolutely
going to be complete fun.
I know. And until we get there, though, you have one more show, one more regular show until we get there.
Aggie Bloom Thompson, who wrote a very, very interesting novel, All the Dirty Secrets. And so, yes, there's a lot to look forward to in that book, too. She'll be on in 2 weeks, and I look forward to having her on and getting to know her a little bit. So,
all right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Ralph. Thanks again to our sponsor. Thank you to Kevin, everyone. More information on the Gatsby's Tavern event will be coming out. Follow thezebra.org. And until next time, be the good news in someone's life, everyone.